men are very underserved
I think they're
by,
very underserved.
yeah, by almost every aspect of service. Men are pretty much underserved.
They are.
And if we can kind of help fill that gap, that would be terrific.
And they're suffering in silence. And like I always say, I'll get 5 or 6 men a week sometimes telling me something, and they feel like they're the only one that feels that way. And I'm like, no, you're the third person today that's told me that. So I know what these patterns are.
Mhm.
And I think that, yeah, I think we've really done a terrible job in society of scapegoating men rather than looking at how do we all grow and evolve together? How do I remember that everybody's a part of me and I want everybody to win? And we can acknowledge that certain things didn't work in the patriarchy, but we can also acknowledge that it wasn't working for men either. The suicide
Yeah.
rates tell us that, you know,
Yes, indeed.
men behaving
And
self-centeredly, that tells us again, because somebody who's happy and joyful as a full bucket doesn't go around behaving poorly, right? And I think women get away with so many things that men can't get away with, but men aren't allowed to say anything about what women do because then all of a sudden they're bad, they're toxic, they're the bad guy. And I just think that we need to be more compassionate and we need to work together as we heal out of the emotional dark ages. I think it takes men, it takes women, it takes anybody on any gender spectrum anywhere. All of them are valid, of course, but I really think that this is something we have to heal together instead of, okay, men, you've been bad, go to your room, women are taking over. That's not going to work. It's going to make the problem worse, or it's going to do to them
yeah.
what they tried with us, which is like trying to solve a problem with the same energy that caused the problem. And I
Mhm.
think men are really suffering.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that with the I guess with the emphasis that was gotten from the women's movement, that women have now become the thing that they disliked so much about men. And I think that is, a very big lesson waiting to be learned. It hasn't been noticed yet, but
Mhm.
all the things they said about men 100 years ago and 200 years ago and about the problems with men and what they were doing, now they have become that very same thing. And that's because it was a woman's movement, not a men and women's movement. That's the problem.
A
When you
human
see it,
movement.
yeah, human movement, when you see it from just one side, you're going to make poor choices. You're
Mhm.
missing, half of what's important. So it has to be about people.
Yeah.
And we have our instincts, males and females. They have different ways of seeing the world. We have all these instincts and things that make us the way we are, that separate the genders. But those things were created, those instincts were created in an environment vastly different from the environment we have today.
Yeah.
So now we have a completely different environment. Evolution evolves to the environment to make you more functional in an environment. So we had a lot of things that made us very functional in the environment of 100,000 years ago. But the environment's changed a lot in the last 500 years.
Yeah.
And now men and women have to both adjust to deal with the new environment. And evolution has to happen together. You
Yeah.
can't have, well, the women will figure out their part and the men will figure out their part, and that will fail. That won't, that will not work. The men and the women have to work together to create attitudes and feelings and understandings that put men and women like that again, not enemies, not gender wars,
No.
not who's right and who's wrong, but find out the ways that make everybody happy.
1 plus 1, if we do it right, it's going to be 1 plus 1 equals 10.
Yes, exactly.
And I think, yeah, and I think women now, there's a lot of things that I see that sort of, I don't judge it. I just notice that it's something that needs to be presenced. And I think it's helpful if a woman does it. But a lot of things that women can now do or say would not be acceptable if men did. I have no trouble hearing women in my life speaking like, oh, my husband, he's so fat, he's eating too much, men are so stupid. You know, like if men were sitting around going, look at my wife, she's so fat, eating so much, stop eating that, you're getting fat. Women are so stupid. Like, you know, or even body shaming. A lot of men tell me they've had eating disorders, they've had body shame issues, especially with genitals, like penis shaming. And I watched a show last week. We were at a family reunion. They were watching a show where the women, the first thing they did when they finished the date was, how big were his hands? How big were his feet? Tell me how he performed. Tell me what size he was. And that's okay on a, you know, an international television show that millions and millions of people are watching. But if men did that to women, we'd be up in arms. But for some reason, it's okay for us to do that to men and say, oh, he's just like little man syndrome, or we're still body shaming men. We are putting a lot of, we're scapegoating them and calling them bad and wrong and toxic and stupid and unevolved and all of these things that I just think they just make me like, ugh. They sort of make my heart hurt a little bit when I see them. And I think I wouldn't want to be a man and be like, you know, you couldn't say those things on a television show about women. You get canceled like that.
Absolutely. That's what I say. Women have become the thing that they disliked in men. And that's unfortunate. Yeah, men, you know, go back, what, 100, 200 years ago, and men were doing that same thing to women, you know.
And some still are, to be fair, for anybody watching. We acknowledge that that's behavior going on. But doing it ourselves doesn't make it better.
Nope.
Compassion and love is going to be what helps us. Compassion and collaboration and love and working together and seeking to understand each other rather than compete with each other.
Yeah. Not only understand, but to provide a space where each gender can shine and do its thing and feel good about it, where they find a place. You know, there's a niche for them where their skills and their attitudes and their interests are not conflicting, but adding. Yes, 1 + 1 makes 10. You end up with something that is so much more if you can cooperate and work together than you do if you struggle. And that's, you know, trying to pinpoint the faults of the other is dysfunctional. That doesn't get you anywhere. Oh, the thing that's wrong with women is, the thing that's wrong with men, and all of that is dysfunctional.
It never worked in the history of ever, and it's not going to start working now.
No, that's not the point. It's not, you know, fault finding. It's finding ways that the two, again, become, I'd even say, necessary for each other, to where they become something much, much greater than two. Yes, it's just, and that, you know, it's not that hard to achieve, in the sense that there's probably a lot of couples who have discovered that, but they're outside the norm. They're not, you know, they're not average. They're people who have grown beyond all of the shaming and the claiming and the negative dialogue to find peace and satisfaction in their relationships. So it's not that it's impossible. You just have to grow up. And I
think it's something people need to be taught too, though, because again, if you've never witnessed something, if you've never experienced something, if you've never been shown it and you've never experienced it, it's like trying to find your way in the dark. Like my husband and I have such a lovely, and I've had lots of bad relationships and participated in making them bad myself. But our relationship is so beautiful and loving and positive and kind. And we had that on our wedding vows, 1 + 1 = 10. But honestly, when we're around other people, it makes them uncomfortable because it makes them acutely aware, I think, of what they're missing, or it's, you know, sometimes even if something is better than what you know, I think the human brain is like our little interface of consciousness. It's a computer and it likes familiar software. So things that are unfamiliar, it's kind of like cannot compute. Like it doesn't have a neural pathway for that. So I think it's going to be teaching people skills and then just being willing to model a different way for people until that sort of becomes the new familiar pattern of humanity.
Yeah, well, that's going to take some time before we turn that corner. But yes, you know, I have a similar experience. You know, And male and female fit together perfectly. They bring out the best in each other. That's a magnificent relationship if they just are who they are. If
Mm-hmm.
they just act the way they are inside, it's an amazing connection that just fits so perfectly together, and it just produces love and peace and happiness and laughing and joy, and that's the way it should be.
Mm-hmm.
But we gain so many dysfunctional ideas out of our culture that it's very hard for people now to find
Yeah.
that loving, caring, sharing space. It's a problem. And the people who have found it, it's because they found that bigger perspective. They've
Mm-hmm.
seen the bigger picture, and they've thrown out all the memes and do this and don't do that so that they get with their culture. They've taken all that junk that the culture tells them and they just thrown it in the wastebasket and said, that's dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we pay attention to that, nothing will work well.
Mm-hmm.
They start from scratch by being authentic people, just who they are, an authentic woman and an authentic man. And guess what? Wow, they go together really, really
Really.
well.
And learning
Yeah.
to eat a lot of crow, I think, is what got me there too. Eating crow after crow after crow, and being like, oh, okay, oh, I did that. That wasn't great. Oh, I have to be accountable for this. I think that too, that radical compassion for ourselves and others, but
Mhm.
also radical accountability. That I think that to be truly in a relationship is to take somebody else's, I always come back to the authentic alignment of your wants, needs, boundaries, and values. It's to take your partner's wants, needs, boundaries, and values is equally important to your own. Studying that person. Like I sometimes talk to men, I'm like, well, tell me, like, what makes your wife tick? Like what makes you tick? Like, what do you like? What do you enjoy? And they're like, I don't know. But if I say, tell me about your car, they're like, well, it was born in, the first paint color was made in this factory and this happened and it seeps through this and it has, I'm like, you have to study your partner like you studied at school or you studied your car or your sports team or your paintings or anything that you really care about. It's that continuous curiosity, that continuous studying,
Mhm.
that continuous taking their wants, needs, boundaries, and values and happiness is equally important to your own. If I make a decision that impacts my husband negatively, it impacts me negatively.
Yeah, I actually find that it's not so much equally important as your own, but actually more important than your own. I think that's
Hmm,
when you get to that point, I think the problem is solved
that's true.
because then you're always willing to see it from the other viewpoint. You're always willing to go with that other viewpoint, and you never get to the my way's better or I'm better or you're not so good here, and none of that happens because the other person, the other person's needs, wants, boundaries, and all of those things, they become more important than your own because your own, they can shift. Your own can accommodate. Your own can find its happiness anyway because what you got is so good that
True.
even though you don't get your way or it's not optimized, so what? It doesn't make any difference at all. And then that's because the other person is actually more important than your own. And I think when you get to that, that's where it gets
That's
golden
true.
because there are no problems then. All the problems are solved because each one looks at the other and thinks, how can I make that person happy? What can I do for them?
I think that's
And
the key. If both are doing it, because when you said that, I
yeah,
thought something in me I felt a discomfort and I looked at it very quickly and I realized, oh, I think because often women are taught to put everybody else before yourself. And if you, that can sometimes itself become unhelpful because you also want to look at, am I happy? Am I aligned? As well as, is that person happy or aligned? So I think it can be slightly different from different gender programming. But I agree with you. If both people are making the other person more important than themselves, instead of just one person, your happiness comes first, and the other person saying, you're right.
Yeah, well, that doesn't work.
No, but if both of them are like, your happiness is my top priority, you've got 1 + 1 = 50.